and out of all the tribes of Israel, I'll put my name forever. Neither will I make the feet of Israel move any more out of the land which I gave their fathers, only if they will observe to do according to all that I have commanded them, and according to all the law that my servant Moses commanded them. But they hearkened not, and Manasseh seduced them to do more evil than did the nations whom the Lord destroyed before the children of Israel. I'll stop reading right there. And last week we talked about the things that Manasseh did, the things that he did to destroy the worship and service of God in the nation or in Judah. And so one of the first things that I talked about last week was how he took away the word of the Lord. And we looked in Josiah's day in like the 18th year of his reign, whenever they found that word, and Josiah read it and rent his clothes because he was so shocked at what he read that this is the things that God had said for us to do. We haven't been doing those, and again. God forgave him because he didn't know, because he didn't have the word of the Lord. And we know that word of the Lord was in Hezekiah's day, but it was gone in Josiah's day. There was only two kings between them, and I'm sure that it was taken away in Manasseh's day. And some priest or some Levite or someone took it and hid it in the temple somewhere where it couldn't be found, so it wouldn't be destroyed, but somewhere where it could be found later. And so he took away the word of the Lord, and then he diminished the men of God. He diminished those men of God so that they didn't have the authority. The people didn't look to them anymore. And so you think about we said that Jewish tradition is that he's the one who had Isaiah sawn asunder, and how that you read when you read. When you read through the Kings and the Chronicles, generally you're reading about the priest. You're reading about, that the king is working with the priest. But you don't read about a priest in Manasseh's day. You read about him working with Hezekiah, and you read about him with Josiah, but you don't read about him in Manasseh's day. And so he diminished the men of God. But then we got down to where he corrupted the house of God. And so I want us to look this morning. I want us to look at how that he corrupted the house of God. We talked about it a little bit last week, but I want us to just think about the things that he did. And I talked about it last week, and I said, just picture Concord right here. Just picture if we just divided Concord up, and instead of just being a place to worship God and worship Jesus, who is God, instead of just being that, Brother Parks, just think if we had a little Muslim section right back over there, and we had a little section for Buddha right there, and then we had the pagan gods over here, and then we had Jehovah's Witnesses back there, and then we had all these little sections. And so you think about, that's what he does to the house of God. So you think, as a child of God, or as a person from Judah who comes up to the house of God to worship, they remembered what that house of God was like once Hezekiah had it rebuilt, and then they come in after Manasseh was there. And what in the world did they see? They come in, and Manasseh has set up all this stuff to worship all these other things. And no doubt anyone who really, truly wanted to worship God, those people were disheartened. Like, well, what's the point of going back there? What's the point of going back there? I don't know if you've ever been to a place. Just think about it. We'll think about it in terms of a restaurant. I know that probably surprises y'all that I think in terms of a restaurant. But anyway, think about it in terms of a restaurant. You ever have like a place you really like to eat? And you really like to eat there, and it's been a while since you've been there, and then you go back and you don't realize it, but it's under new management, and the new management's changed the menu, or the new management has changed all the recipes, and you go in and you're really excited. You're going to order your favorite, your favorite whatever, and you go in and you sit down and you're like, it's not even on the menu anymore. Wait a second, what about this? Well, we don't serve that anymore. We used to be a fish house, but now we only serve chicken. But y'all had really good, and I mean, I don't know if that's ever happened to y'all. It happens to me because I'm from a state further up north, still south state of the Mason-Dixon line, but I am from a state originally that was from further up north, and I go up there, Brother Tyrone, and 90% of the restaurants that we ate at when I was a kid, they're just gone. They're just gone. My wife mentioned one the other day. I couldn't even remember the name of it. My sister, we texted my sister, and she sent us the name of the restaurant. But they're just gone. But I mean, how many times have you walked into a place and you're like, I'm so excited to go back to this place? And for me, I travel a lot, so I kind of get my little favorite spots that I go. And you go in and you're like, oh my word, it's not even the same anymore. But think about this. Think about you haven't been to the house of God, and you're gonna show up. You're gonna show up to that temple, and you're so excited because of all the good things that happened in that house of God whenever Hezekiah was there. And then you show up, and there's someone new in charge. And it shouldn't have been someone new in charge of the house of God, but someone new in charge of the kingdom. And Manasseh has changed everything. He's changed everything, and he destroys that place to you. And like I said, you go to this, and for me, I go to that restaurant. I'm like, well, I'm not coming back here. Why would I go back there? They've completely changed it. It's not the same place anymore. And so they got one shot. Either whatever they changed either needs to be really, really good, or you're just like, look, why would I want to go back there? And so, but you think about here, they come up to worship, they come up to do their sacrifice, and they come up there, and what in the world is this? And so let's take a look at it. Let's take it first in verse number 2. It says that he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord after the abomination of the heathen whom the Lord cast out before the children of Israel. And we're going to see that. We're going to see that it's just like he said, hey, look, we're going to go back not to the old ways of serving God. We're going to go back to the old ways of the land. We're going to go back to the old ways of the land. And the people that were here before us, we're going to serve their God. We're going to serve their God or their gods or their many gods. We're going to serve anything and everything. And so it says in verse number 3, it says, for he built up again the high places which Hezekiah's father destroyed. And we talked about that several weeks ago, about him building up again the things his father had destroyed. But you think about them high places, and again, it's going to say in Chronicles, when we get to Chronicles, that they would try to worship God at those high places. They would try to worship Jehovah at those high places. But that's not where God wanted him. That's not where God wanted them to worship. God wanted them to come to that temple. He did not want them using those high places. And so, but Hezekiah started off just by building those high places up. And you think about, what does that do? That has people like, oh, well, we can worship here. We don't need to come. We don't need to come. And I mentioned it the other week, how people are like, I can worship God. I can sit in my deer stand on Sunday and I can worship God. Me and God just have us a time. Or I can sit out on the boat and, we can, a lot of churches experienced that, because when they had the pandemic, Miss Jimmy, and they shut churches down, people started going out on the lake on Sunday. They started going out on the lake. They started going to the cabin. They started going here, there, and everywhere, and not coming to church because church was closed down. And then they decided, well, guess what? We can watch the live stream on the boat. We can be out there, we can be fishing and watching the live stream at the same time, and it's the same thing. And anyone that's ever watched a live stream, it's not the same thing. I mean, it's not the same. We had a good service here Wednesday night. But the people watching the live stream could not have felt the things that you felt here in the service. It's just not the same. And so maybe they did feel some of it, but it's not the same. And so what that does, it's like, hey, less of the true worshipers of God, they're gonna stay out because, he gave them another place to worship. But he set up those high places. But then look what he does. It says to rebuild up again the high places which his father had destroyed, and he reared up altars for Baal. He rears up altars for Baal, and so he makes those altars for Baal. And so Baal was the Canaanite god. And it says, which Ahab had done. Why would he do that? Why would he, after who his father was and who he was raised by till he was 12, why would he say, you know what, Jehovah's, he's really not a good God. He really doesn't do that much for you. I'm going to serve this other God. I'm going to serve this other God that every other king that served Baal, what happened? God got angry with them. And God went after them whenever they would build an altar to Baal, or whenever they would serve Baal. And God would send men of God out to admonish them that, hey, they're in the wrong way. Why on earth would Manasseh say it's going to be different with me? Why would he say, you know what, I think we're going to do this? I mean, you got to think, how evil would his heart have had to have been? It's one thing for the first guy to do it, and he just didn't know any better. It's one thing for the first guy to do it, and he's like, well, I just kind of got myself a little messed up right there, and I wasn't thinking squarely, I wasn't thinking right, but, this is what happened to me. But it's a whole nother thing, Brother Jay, when someone's got history lesson after history lesson after history lesson, and then he says, I know what happened this time, and this time they served Baal, but I'm going to bring him into Judah anyway. And again, it's almost, to me, when I read it, it's almost like Manasseh was trying to get God mad at him. It's almost like he was trying to it was like he was daring God to be mad at him. It was like he was daring God to punish them. And to me, that's craziness. But we all know people that we've talked to that they just don't care. They don't care about God. They don't care about the judgment of God. And they'll do something and almost challenge God. They'll almost challenge God. And God doesn't have to answer that challenge. But one day they'll stand before him and wish they hadn't done that. And so here, Manasseh, he builds those altars for Balaam. And then it says he made a grove. He made a grove. And when you read this right here, he made that grove, and that grove is again, it's a part of the pagan system. The Babylonians and the Canaanite goddess of fortune and happiness. That's who they were worshiping. And I want you to see, you're going to see this grove again. You're going to see it again. And so, Brother Parks, he makes something for them to worship. When you look down here a little further, we'll look in verse number 7. And he set a graven image of the grove that he made in the house of the Lord. And if you look in Chronicles, it actually says he made an idol. If you look in Chronicles, it actually says he made an idol. So what is that grove? You think about this. Has anyone ever went somewhere where they have art, like where they're showing off art, and you can't take men shouldn't go in there. Women shouldn't go in there. You sure shouldn't take your children in there, Miss Jimmy, because they make these sculptures or whatever of basically naked bodies. They make these sculptures of naked bodies. And I mean, if you go to Washington, D.C., you're like, oh, I'm going to go through the Smithsonian. I'm going to go, whoa, we need to get out of here. Or you're like, oh, this famous art thing. And guess what? It might be famous, but it's famous for not the good reasons. And so what Manasseh did was he took an image of what he thought this goddess should look like. He took an image of and he had someone sculpt it out. And Brother Parks, he put it in verse number 7. I'm getting way ahead of myself. But he set a graven image of the grove that he made in the house, of which the Lord said to David and to Solomon his son, in this house and in Jerusalem, which I have chosen out of all the tribes, will I put my name forever. So he took this image of this thing that he had created. Again, if we look in Chronicles, let me find it real quick. And let me look right here. And in verse number 7, in Chronicles 33, 2 Chronicles 33, and he set a carved image, the idol which he had made in the house of God. So it's a carved image. Again, like I said, when I read Grove, I was thinking something different. But he had this image carved of this goddess that he wanted to worship, and he set that thing in the house of God. Again, I know we got all kinds of people in here, but I'm sure y'all are understanding. I mean, can you imagine, Brother Jay, if we went to some art show and they had this sculpture of a female, a very attractive female body, and we said, you know what I think? That would look good right in the middle of church. Isn't that awful, Miss Jimmy? I mean, that would look so good if we just set that thing right up by the altar. That is what Manasseh did. He went and he had this image made, and it wasn't bad enough in verse number 3 that he had it made. And he's like, hey, I got this image, and it's so nice. I got it in my bedroom here, and I can just look at it anytime I want to. And I can bow down and worship. I can worship at this idol. I can worship at this image. I can worship at this false deity anytime I want to. That's pretty bad, Brother Parks. But when you get down to verse number 7, you realize that he's like, hey, that's not good enough just for me to be worshiping this thing that I created. Everybody needs to see it. And everybody needs to see it and see its beauty and see that how could anything be that beautiful and not be a god or a goddess? How could anything be that beautiful? How could anything be that perfect and not be a goddess? And where will more people see it than anywhere else? I know where I'll put it. I'll put it in the house of God. That's who we're dealing with right here. We're dealing with someone whose heart is so wicked that he thought, you know what, I'll bring this image of this idol of this goddess, I'm going to bring this thing into the house of God. You're going to see, and I'm getting way ahead of myself again, but then you understand why it says in verse number 9, but they hearken not, which is talking about to God and to the men of God, but they hearken not, and Manasseh seduced them. He seduced them. I mean, I know this is a mixed class, but we all understand, how do you seduce a man? With a beautiful woman. That's why, you look on a billboard, you ride down the road, you look on a billboard, and they might be selling extension cords. They're selling an extension cord, but they got a beautiful woman holding that extension cord. They're selling car parts. And we know that beautiful woman is not, she's not changing the oil in that car. But that's who they got out there acting like she's changing oil in the car. What are they doing? They're seducing you. They're seducing you to want to buy that product because you correlate that product with that beautiful woman. And again, it's nonsense. It's nonsense is what it is, but because men are who they are seduced by that beautiful woman. They will look, they will watch, they will pay attention to. It is what it is. And Manasseh knew the heart of men, and he knew that even men who want to be right with God can and will be seduced if they're forced to look at something like that long enough. So, Brother Parks, how do you come to the house of God and have that thing where you're like, I can't worship God with that thing sitting right there? I can't worship God. I mean, we've all been in a service where something is going on and you just get distracted. Sometimes it's a child. Sometimes it's a child just acting up and they're just doing something. Sometimes it's one of these lights going, it's going on and off. I mean, is it not easy to get distracted in the house of God? Sometimes it's just a simple thing and it just distracts you. And you get that and the service is over and you're like, well, I don't even remember half of what was said. Or sometimes you're not paying attention, and the preacher's like, Brother Chris, will you pray? Yeah. And you're like, oh man, I don't even know what I'm supposed to be praying about. But you just got distracted, and Chris and Jay know this, but my mind wanders, Brother Parks, and it's funny because back whenever I used to I used to work in the field a lot more, and sometimes I knew I'd be working outside. I'd want to know what the weather was, and now I got it on my phone, and it doesn't matter. But I used to listen to WSB, and I used to listen to Kirk Mellish, and I could guarantee you, I would be purposefully listening for the weather, Brother Croft, and my mind, when Kirk Mellish would come on, I would start thinking about something else, and then I would hear him end it, and I'm like, I have no idea what he said. I have no idea what he said. And you can get distracted in church like that. You can start thinking about, what are we eating for lunch? We got ham at the house for lunch today. It's going to be really good. But you can get to thinking about, man, we got that ham, and I tell you what, we did it. We cooked it. We baked it all night, and we had the pineapples on it and brown sugar, and we cut it up this morning, and we put it in there, and I put more brown sugar all in the juice, and that's going to be so good. And you can start thinking about something as simple as that. And then the service is like, what did he preach on? Sometimes up in the sound room, I'll be paying attention to something else, and I'll miss the title of the sermon. I'll just miss the title. And so I'll be like, when the sermon's over, I'm like, I got to title this thing. And Brother Randy's going to see this because I send him every one of his messages, and I'm like, I'm going to title this, and he's going to think, he wasn't even listening to me if that's what he titled my message, because I said, it's going to be, it's going to be blah, blah, blah. And sometimes I just miss it, Brother Parks, because I'm messing with the live stream, or I'm adjusting knobs or doing something like that, and I just miss it. And that's just little things. But can you imagine if here's this, and I don't know how tall it was, he's the king. He can make it as tall as he wants to, but I don't know how tall it was, or how big it was, or how drastic it was, or what kind of prominent position, or whether they put it in a corner, or whether they put it out where everyone had to see. But can you imagine coming to the house of God? We're coming down to worship. We're gonna come. We're gonna do our sacrifices like we're supposed to. And what in the world is that thing? What is she doing here? And that's what Manasseh did. But again, like I said, he started out just by making it. But then he put it in the house of God. And so then you're going to see in verse number 3, he reared up altars for Baal and made a grove, as did Ahab, king of Israel. And he worshipped all the host of heaven and served them. And again, here he is, and he's like, let me see, who else can I worship? Who else can I serve? Oh, I know. The sun, the moon, the stars. And again, think about, we're like, oh, that's so silly. But people still do it. They still do it to this day. They still worship that sun. They still worship the moon, the stars, and they think they can read things in the stars. They read stuff in the stars. And I don't think anyone in here reads their horoscope. But Brother Jay, they put that thing in a newspaper. When I was a kid, I used to read it. I didn't know you wasn't supposed to. I didn't know what it was. And so when I was a kid, I would read it. And I'd be like, huh. And again, like I said, to me, it's like a Chinese fortune cookie. It's funner just to read and be like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever read in all my life. Or, I got the wrong fortune cookie right here. But Brother Parks, people read those horoscopes and they adjust their life based off of what that thing says. They read it and they adjust their life. It says, hey, you're going to meet somebody new today. So they go around all day trying to meet somebody new. Or hey, you're going to have a bad day today. I'm going to have to call in sick. Why? Because I'm going to have a bad day. What do you mean you're going to have a bad day? Well, read my horoscope this morning, said I'm going to have a bad day, so I'm not going to come to work. I don't want to have a bad day at work. I'll just have it here at the house all by myself. People read those things, and they trust in those things, and they believe those things. And so here's Manasseh, and now he's giving them another option. Hey, we don't just have to worship Jehovah. You don't just have to worship Baal. You don't have to just worship this goddess that I've created right here. You can worship the sun. You can worship the moon. You can worship the stars. What do you want to worship? And so it says the host of heaven. And then in verse number 4, he says, and he built altars in the house of the Lord, of which the Lord said, in Jerusalem will I put my name. He built these altars, and it was for these other gods. It was for these other things to worship. It's like, if you remember, Hezekiah's father Ahaz had that one altar built. He had that one altar built, but Manasseh's like, no, we're building altars. We're building altars. Hey, if you got a God that you think we should worship, let me know. Just let me know, and we'll build an altar for it, and we'll set that altar up, and we'll have that little shrine to that God in the house of God. Again, I think I said it last week, but he's the king. He could have had this built anywhere. He could have done like Solomon and just had different houses built. But instead, he's like, no, we're going to put them all in that house of God. We're going to put all in the house of God so that anyone that has a pure heart to worship God, their heart is going to be corrupted when they come in that house of God. Their heart is going to be disappointed. They're going to walk away sad saying, I can't worship there. I can't worship there. And again, my kid said it the other day, and it's just, we think we've got church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and we think along those lines, but that's not what they had. They didn't have somewhere where they went Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. They had certain times they were supposed to come, certain times they were supposed to come and be there. And it wasn't like, again, that they could just be like Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. And also, you think about it, we live in the South, and I know that even in America it's not this way, but we live in the South, and you go within a 10-mile radius, there's probably 7, 8 Baptist churches in a 10-mile radius of where we're sitting right here. And if ABC Baptist Church gets corrupted, we can go to CDE Baptist Church, or we can go to, any other Baptist church. We can just go somewhere else. And I know it's not that simple, and I know that, most churches are not like we are, and I understand that. I know it's not that simple. But it is that simple that if I'm not here tonight, there's 100 other options that I could go to tonight. 100 other options tonight that we could go. They didn't have that, Brother Jay. They didn't have that option. And he was purposefully destroying that house of God so that when they came in there, they could not worship God. They couldn't. It was impossible. It was impossible to go in there and just bow down and worship God and not be distracted. Because again, we know, some of those religions are chant religions. They're not quiet. They're over there making all kinds of noises and sounds and stuff like that. Again, like you said, just sitting in here. What if someone sat and chanted the whole service? Just chanted the whole service about whatever. Could you really pay attention to what Brother Randy was preaching? No, it gets distracting. Brother Jay, I know you remember. Remember the lady that she'd adopt the kids, Lucille, and she would rock these babies in church. And I'm talking, when I say rock, I'm talking like the pew would shake. She would rock them so violently while she was holding this little baby, and it would just distract the daylights out of people. I'm like, that every one of them children had to have shaken baby syndrome because she rocked them so violently. And so, but you imagine coming into church and they're making all kinds of racket, or coming in the house of God, making all kinds of racket to a God that you don't know and you don't want to serve. And that's who Manasseh kept. He just kept adding and adding and adding to the temple. That's what he kept doing. And so then you're going to see in verse number, where were we at? In verse number 5, and he built up altars for all the host of heaven in the 2 courts of the house of the Lord. Again, that's what I was saying earlier about the sun, the moon, and stars. And he made his son pass through the fire. Now that's Molech. That is Molech right there. And actually, if you look in Chronicles, it actually says he made his children. And so, but I want you to look in Leviticus chapter number, or you don't have to look, I'm just going to read to you. Leviticus chapter number 20, it says, and the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, again, thou shalt say to the children of Israel, whosoever he be of the children of Israel, or of the strangers that sojourn in Israel, that giveth any of his seed unto Molech, he shall surely be put to death. The people of the land shall stone him with stones. And I will set my face against that man, and will cut him off from among his people, because he hath given of his seed unto Molech, to defile my sanctuary and to profane my holy name. And if the people of the land do anyways hide their eyes from the man when he giveth of his seed unto Molech, and kill him not, then I will set my face against that man and against his family, and will cut him off, and all that go a-whoring after him to commit whoredom with Molech from among their people. And the soul that turneth after such as have familiar spirits, after wizards, to go a-whoring after them, I will even set my face against that soul, and will cut him off from among his people. And so you see right here, this is all the way back in Leviticus, Brother Jay, that God said, hey, you're going to go into the land. And when you go into the land, this is the God that they have. This is the God that they serve. And don't you ever let someone take their child, take their seed down there and offer their seed to that God of Molech. And here is the king of Judah taking his son, in Chronicles his children, and taking them down there and offering them to Molech. The Bible says that person was supposed to be stoned. And the people that saw it and turned their back and ignored it, God said those people are to be cut off. Those people are to be cut off. And so here, it's almost like Manasseh was reading the Bible and said, Anyway, it's almost like Manasseh was reading what he had, God's law through Moses, and like, oh, God says don't go to Molech. Hey, got a road trip. Honey, get the baby. What? Yeah, we're going down. We're going down to Hinnom. What are we going down to Hinnom for? It's okay, got a little road trip. And he takes his child down there and offers his child to Molech. It's almost like Brother Parks, he just kept reading in the scriptures that he had, and everything he read that God said, hey, don't do this. He said, well, I know what I'm going to do now. I mean, you want to talk about a rebel. Again, we know who his father was. We know how he should have been raised for 12 years. And it's almost like everything he heard, he's like, yep, I'm going to do that. Yep, going to do that. Yep, going to do that. You ever seen a child that was raised in church and raised in a very strict home? And what happens when they get out of that? Whenever they get out of that environment, they're like, couldn't do that for 18 years. Going to do that. Couldn't do that for 18 years. Going to do that. And they just start checking things off, destroying their life, but feeling good about it for a while. Because why? Because they were so sheltered and so deprived for all them years. And so that is who Manasseh was. He offered his child, he offered his son and his children to Molech. And then it says he observed times. And so some of these, they kind of all run together, but he observed times. So the practice of soothsaying, spiritualism or magic. And so Brother Parks, I mean, again, it was anything goes. It was the wild, wild west in Jerusalem at this time, because it was like anyone that had been hidden for all those years while Hezekiah was there was able to just come out of the woodwork. And just come out of the woodwork and, hey, you know what? You got a problem here. Don't talk to God about it. Come here. Let me see your palm. Hand me your palm. Let me see it. Oh, look at these cards. I got these cards right here. I'm going to lay these cards out, and I'm going to look at these cards, and I'm going to read these cards, and I'm going to tell you your fortune. I'm going to tell you your fortune based off of these cards that I'm seeing right here. That's who Manasseh brought into his kingdom and brought into the house of God. And someone come in, like I mentioned about the guy at work this morning, and they're so brokenhearted, and they're like, come here, let me tell you something. They couldn't even make it down to the altar to actually worship God because they were being pulled in multiple directions by all these people. It says that he observed times. And he used enchantments. Enchantments is the practice, again, of fortune telling. And he used enchantments. And he dealt with familiar spirits. And so, trying to read my own writing. Familiar spirits the word right there, when you look it up in the Strong's, is when you look up the definition, it's necromance, and that's communicating with the dead. That's communicating with the dead. So here it is. He's like, someone's like, oh, I sure miss, my old papaw. Well, I tell you what, just come right over here, son. I got just what you need. You want to talk to old paps? Just come right over here and sit down and just sit in front of this person right here, and this person will be able to communicate with old paps for you. He was bringing that into the house of God. Again, what kind of confusion, what kind of madness, what kind of just insanity must it have been again, like I said, it would have been wall-to-wall idols and false gods and altars to false gods and all these people like, who is this guy? And what's he doing dressed like that for? Oh, well, that's the necromancer. That's who he is. If you want to speak to someone, if you miss your daddy and you're having trouble and your daddy would have told you what to do, just go sit down in front of him and he'll be able to speak to your daddy for you. That's the things that he was doing. And we're not done. We're not done. He used enchantments to deal with familiar spirits and wizards. Again, familiar spirit, soothsayer, necromancer, wizards. And you're like, well, Harry Potter, it's just entertainment. It's not just entertainment. It's not just entertainment. It's getting your mind and your child's mind conditioned to the fact that, maybe there's some reality to this. Maybe it's not a bad thing. Maybe it's not a bad thing. I'm sorry. I read it in Leviticus where God said, hey, don't deal with these familiar spirits. Don't deal with these. Don't deal with them. Don't allow your children to deal with them. Don't get involved with these people that are this way. And so, again, we're going to get down in familiar spirits, wizards. He wrought much wickedness in the sight of the Lord to provoke him to anger, and he set the graven image. We talked about that. The grove that he'd made, we talked about that again. And we're going to read in verse number 8. Neither will I make the feet of Israel move anymore out of the land. This is God, which I gave their fathers, only if they will observe to do according to all that I have commanded them, and according to all the law that my servant Moses commanded them. Again, I mentioned it last week how that Manasseh took away that law, so it couldn't be seen, it couldn't be read anymore. But here, God's like, hey, this. I said it, and it still stands. I said it, and it still stands. They are to follow that law. They are to observe that law. I expect them to follow that law. I expect them to observe to do the things that I commanded them from my servant Moses. And Manasseh said, anything he said we're supposed to do, I'm going to do the opposite. And you get down to verse number 9, it says, but they hearken not. Why? Because it wasn't just Manasseh. It would have been one thing had it only been Manasseh, but it wasn't just Manasseh. He in this verse right here, it says Manasseh seduced them. He seduced them. And seduced is to be led astray. To be led astray, to be caused to err, misled, and it says right here, mentally or morally. Mentally or morally. And so Manasseh took those people and he put so much stuff in front of them and said, hey, look, I'm worshiping all of it. God hadn't done a thing to me. And look how wonderful my life is. And your life could be just as wonderful as mine. He groomed them. He groomed them. And gradually, they're like, well, good for the goose, good for the gander. And they allowed themselves to be seduced to worship all of these other things that God said don't worship. Worship, again, can you think about having a child and saying, you know what, we're going to pass that child over to Molech. We're just going to burn that baby in the fire. That's what they did. And Manasseh seduced them because he did it to his own children. And they're like, well, I think I remember someone said one time that God said, if you do this, that person's not, that person's supposed to die. He didn't die. Well, yeah, because God said the people were supposed to stone the person. It wasn't that God was going to just automatically kill them. The people were supposed to stone them. And sometimes, we know the devil does this. We know from Adam and Eve that he just twists the words around just a little bit, just twisting the words. Well, thou shalt surely die. Well, that's not what God said. And so, took a bite of the fruit, didn't die. Must be good. Hey, Adam, come here, take a bite of this. Must be good. And then you realize you're naked. What in the world? Been that way all along, but now what happened? Sin came in because you realize, oh, yeah, that devil lied to me. Manasseh's lying to me. But these people allowed themselves to be seduced into doing these things. Seduced into like, hey, I can worship that God right there. You mean I can talk to old Paps again? You mean I can hear from my mother again? If I could, the song, if I could hear my mother pray again, I'd just like to hear my mother pray again. Come on over here and sit down. Come on over here and sit down. You mean they can tell me, by the way, if them people were that smart, why don't they just play the lottery? I mean, if you had that ability to tell the fortune, Brother Tyrone, if you had that ability, I'm sorry, if I had that ability, Brother Croft, I'd be a gambler. I'd be, whatever the longest bet was, man, I'd be putting money down. They'd be like, this guy wins every single time. Why do those people that have little old shacks that look like a dump and they live in there? Why? Because they don't know what they're doing. They don't actually have that ability. But anyways, I mean, think about it. Think about that these people were seduced. All the things that God had did for them whenever Hezekiah was king, and now they've been seduced to just following anything while Manasseh's king. Thank y'all.